Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture.
Hello. Welcome back to Horticulture. Jessica, Ray, how are you all?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Ready for fall weather.
I'm pretty good. Yeah. We've been riding ups and downs in our temperatures around here, and I think we're at the point where you start looking at your watch and saying, "Is it fall yet?" But in the event that we're not going to have fall just right away, I'm curious: do you all have a cool treat, keep cool type treat that you prefer this time of year? Ice cream,
like
popsicle, chill. Yeah.
I don't know that it's a cool treat, but we mentioned it on our last episode. Something that I associate with fall now because of our wonderful orchards. Maybe it's a keep cool treat. I think it's a pretty cool treat is apple cider donuts. We mentioned that the last time, and I just want to expound on that conversation because I feel passionate about them.
They are delicious.
A lot about fried pies, which got me pretty excited. But I don't know if that's a cool treat, but it's one that I associate with the weather getting cooler.
Yeah, very brief recap of that apple cider donut conversation was that we went to an orchard. My wife came out with apple cider donuts, only to inform me those are for our neighbors, not for you. So,
Brett, the bitterness still seeps through.
Yeah,
the bitterness.
Yeah. But my bitterness is only matched by the sweetness of those donuts that I can imagine our neighbors really enjoyed.
Yeah.
To be fair, the kids were really excited about them, so whatever.
But by kids, you mean Brett or
the kids that ended up receiving them?
The kids that
Brett, the kid Brett was excited, but ultimately then
dreams are crushed. Yeah.
What about you, Jessica? You and the squad, your squad.
Well, I am very fond of ice cream, but we've done a lot of popsicles this summer. We did a lot of we really like pineapple, so we made pineapple popsicles. Yeah, we made them ourselves with the little mold. We did a couple different kinds surprisingly per recipes from Sesame Street. What we have watched where there's a foodie truck with Cookie Monster is a big thing in my house right now. And they demonstrated how to make pineapple popsicles. And we were like, you know what? We can do that. And they were actually really delicious. The lemonade ones were a little tart. I did not care for those as much, but my children still ate them up and said they were fantastic. But there's a lot of things that kids think that are fantastic tasting that I would question at times, but they've enjoyed them. So we've had a lot of popsicles this summer.
Ooh, well, you just brought up another question that I have in our little intro here. So I asked this to people on our team the other day. So of the five main, flavor types. So you got sour, sweet, bitter, umami, and salty. Do you have a favorite and a least favorite? Sour, sweet,
popsicles?
No, not for popsicles, just in general. Not a fan of a salty popsicle, to be honest.
Or sour. Well, maybe a sour.
The darn things just won't stay frozen.
Yeah. Dang it. I don't know. Man, can we pick two, like sweet and salty?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that combo. Classic.
You like sweet and salty?
Oh,
What about the other end, the ones that you don't like as much?
Oh, bitter, anything that's, but I like black licorice. Some people would call that bitter. I don't know, but maybe the bitter stuff, I will not be one of those guys sucking on a immature persimmon. That is not my jam. Sorry.
With black licorice, you are not going to beat the allegations of Alive in the 19th century, Ray.
I know, but I'm going to own that. I love black licorice. It's an acquired taste.
I like sweet, and then I want to. If you know me well, I have this thing that I want to like sour things and I want to like lemon. And it's this very comical thing now that I always try it. And every time I have the same facial reactions, but I want to love lemon so bad because there's so many things you can bake with lemon and all of these things that sound fantastic. But then every time it's the only time I ever got close enough to it was all three of my pregnancies. I liked sour things during those times.
Whoa.
And two boys and a girl. It was just all three of them. Still, I liked sour things during that time.
What kind of sour stuff were you going to at that point?
this last pregnancy, I ate a lot of Nerds gummy clusters.
Yes, you did. Yeah.
Ray was around me when he saw that I was like, "Would you like some Nerd gummy clusters?"
I
I
mean,
would
you
just pull them out
introduced
of my
me
bag.
to different kinds of nerds, and I'm like, wow, I didn't know these existed. Yeah.
Yeah, but I
So,
enjoyed like more key lime pie and like sour kind of things than I do now. So, but I don't really care for bitter. I would say like bitter would be below sour because I'm trying to make the sour work, I
now,
guess.
Brett, you have a complex palate. Your answer here is going to be interesting to me because I know that. I mean, you and Annie both. I mean, you have this affinity, and I've seen you even fix amazing food. So, I'm going to be interested in your take on your own question.
Yeah. Well, so anyone who knows me is not surprised that the snobby, elite, whatever, answer that my favorite is probably umami flavor.
You're going to have to
Maybe,
explain that to me a
Yeah,
little bit.
well,
Expound.
I need to know more about that because I might be
Yes,
able to rank
please.
mine differently.
yeah. So I think one of the things we sometimes do, this is again, it's just making me sound like such a snooty person, but I think umami flavors have a really important. They're given more primacy and thought about more in like some Asian cultures. As a flavor that, and also sweetness is used differently in Asian, like a lot of Asian cuisine, other places too. But it's like you think of it as like the savory component, but
Oh.
not the saltiness.
Okay.
So the things that you tend to associate with umami are things like beef is one example, like the beefiness of beef. A lot of people consider that, to be the umami flavor. Mushrooms have a lot of earthiness and savoriness and depth of flavor. Miso paste, soy sauce, even Worcestershire sauce to some extent. Again, the saltiness and the umaminess go together a lot in a lot of those, but it's this other thing, and it's almost like it's a blend of sensation and flavor, at least in my experience of it, where it's like almost like a creaminess or a richness that is just not, if you think about sour stuff or tangy stuff, is like there's a brightness to it. This has more of like a richness and a mouth. There's mouthfeel can be associated with it. So yeah, it's something that has like a really a depth of flavor. It's not exactly saltiness, but often I think is associated with saltiness. Yeah,
I have to rethink my
some
answer.
beans.
Yeah, I have to rethink my answer because all those things, the foods you just mentioned and salsas, I love all those things. So,
Yeah, same.
Yeah. Well, the problem is I love all of the flavors. So to even say this one's my least favorite, but my least favorite will probably be sour.
yeah,
But I love like vinegar and tanginess. But I'm not like a picklehead or like a sour.
yeah,
I love sauerkraut, but I'm not like a. I love Sour Patch, or I really like Sour Patch Kids, but I don't love them like some people do, or like
yeah. I'm the same boat. I'll eat them
yeah.
on occasion.
And so I think for me sour is the lowest one. But umami is one of those. It's kind of it's harder to define.
Sounds
it's
like it is
something
hard to define. Yeah.
and it's we don't have as many reference points, but like it's almost like, if you're really for me, like a hamburger has a really strong. I just had a really nice hamburger at the Nightjar down in Berea last night, and it has this oh man, like savory. You can tell we're coming up on lunch recording this. Flavor to it that's it's just hard to beat.
Hamburger sometimes just hits just right when you get that flavor and juiciness and prepared in just such a way. That's probably my favorite food ever. When I get the one just to my liking, is that hamburger. I mean,
That's
hands down amazing.
Something else, not to just be like, oh, the weird things Jessica liked when she was pregnant, but also with all three of my pregnancies, I wanted cheeseburgers, and that's how some of my office coworkers figured out I was pregnant before I told anyone else.
Oh wow!
Because
Cheeseburgers.
I always bring my lunch to work, and suddenly I was just like, "Hey guys, I'm gonna go pick something up," and they were just like, "What is she doing?" And like I was suddenly getting like a cheeseburger with an ice cold Coke, and they were like, something's going on with her. And by the third kid, they were like, that's
Your
Martell, right?
routines had changed,
But now I'm back to bringing my lunch to work again because I've had some people try to convince me. They're like, "Doesn't the dairy barn sound really good today, Jessica?" And I was like, "Oh, it does, but I have my lunch." And they're like, "Man, she won't go out and
Wow.
get us burgers now."
Yeah,
Maybe
that's the
that's just a
tell.
test. Yeah, that's just a test. They're just testing you. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, so I mean, I think, and that opens it to another prompt that maybe we can do in another future episode of for extension people, their go-to on, you got to get something on the road. What do you get? And a burger would maybe a good answer for that. But
Road snacks, that could be its own show for this
yeah,
guy. I'm a gas
Mhm.
station
I feel like
connoisseur.
between all of us,
Yeah.
honestly, yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
But
yeah. Absolutely. Food adventures.
But there is this component of being an agent where, and be, work that I do too sometimes, where you go out and you're going to visit people on their farms or at their house or at the, getting these calls for a home visit, farm visit, and the whole range in between. And so I thought maybe it kind of be a cool idea to talk about some of the visits you all have been on, recently, maybe this year, or some other ones that come to mind, and like some of the lessons or the information you shared. What are the common ones, or maybe what's an odd one that sticks out? So maybe we'll just start with Ray. Do you have a visit, or either a recent one or otherwise, that sticks out? And what happened? What'd you learn? What did they learn? What'd you talk about?
I'll talk about trends. I get more of a trend than as
A
because it was
specific one, yeah.
multiple visits. Yeah, since it was weather played a big role this year in kind of site visits. So people were asking early on when there was so much rain. I got questions, or they ask as a kind of an add-on to the main visit. We'd go and look, and of course, weeds were growing in production areas. So I answered a lot more questions this year, and just kind of thought through the processes with people on weed suppression and weed control, because everybody got behind when it stayed so wet for so long. They're like, we're mowing in between the rows this year of our production areas instead of cultivating, or some kind of chemical control product. They were just straight out mowing in some cases, but a lot of my discussions early on during the year, we didn't have a lot of irrigation questions because there was not a lot of that needed in a lot of instances, depending on the crop. But a trend for the springtime was just thinking through and working through weed control. And I'll give a specific example.
Before you jump
Go
into the
ahead.
example, I was just, for those, some folks who their whole orientation to weed control in a home garden might be, I go out and pull the weed out, and even if it rained, that's not a big deal. Why would it be like rain would prevent you from? Did you say cultivating? What does that mean? Like, why would
Yeah,
that prevent you?
we've talked about it on the show before. One of the things you just don't do, and it's bad even for home gardens, and it's we know it's really bad in a commercial setting, but it's just not good. Even walking, even foot pressure on a waterlogged soil does bad things. It causes lots of compression, loss of soil structure, and it just is difficult because everything's muddy. But my main concern is soil structure, especially commercially, but also for homeowners. Just not being able to get out. It was a very wet spring in Kentucky. If you were outside of Kentucky, this may not make a lot of sense, but for reference, it was I guess the wettest spring we've ever had in Kentucky. But it was hard early on to get out and work, and I encourage people not to do so. To have a lot of implements out on wet soil, no cultivation at all when the ground was really wet. But even foot traffic in gardens, I've dealt with the fallout of that before, where people will say, man, because a lot of times gardens, if it's a small space garden, they'll have like or a lot of heavy pressure on just a really defined footpath. And I'll get a kind of a follow-up comment the year after a wet spring like this, and they'll say, man, I tried to go out and till that, and it was like tilling up concrete, or they tilled it in the fall and it was just all compressed and hard. It did a lot of damage. So I tried to encourage people to be careful of that. But also at the same time, we don't want, especially in production areas, we don't want the seed bed to increase even more with things like crabgrass. That stuff going to seed, I would see these producers or homeowners and crabgrass starting to go to seed, or some of these really problematic weeds. And that's just going to create problems for years if you get, that seed load into the soil. So there was just a lot of questions, a lot of site visits, a lot of discussions on weeds early on. That's before we had to deal with diseases and everything later in the season.
Yeah. Well, I interrupted you. I think you had a specific
No, I was
example
just I
related
was
to
just going
the.
to give that
Yeah.
example of weeds going to seed.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
one thing we really don't want is I would see that starting to happen. I'm like, well, what are your options? And that's when we talked about mowing and things. People don't generally think about taking a push mower to if it's a smaller production area, going out and mowing. But I'm like, anything you can do to keep those, to minimize pressure on your soil, but also, minimize the number of weeds that are going to seed. So yeah, handled a
Yeah.
lot of questions like that. It was just weather related and, what's this going to do to my tomato? Is it going to delay ripening? But all that happened later in the season with
Right.
the fluctuations of temperature.
Right.
What
As we
about you,
get
Jessica?
to this time of year, for me, I miss the big spring, all the questions in the early spring this year for me. But around this time, we start to see tree questions start to really hype up
Everything had
because,
fungal leaf spots this year. My goodness. Yeah.
well, we're a lot drier where we're at
Yeah.
than where you guys are.
I
And
noticed that
so,
when I was down in your
um,
area.
So we're seeing the traditional what happens when you get into late summer with large
Mm.
trees. Your tree might have been struggling all year, but it really starts to show those signs of that struggle as we get later into the summer.
Yeah.
That's when we start to notice the dieback occurring, leaves turning brown sooner, anthracnose, all of those kind of things really showing up. So I have had a couple of the visits of I have large trees that are suddenly declining, and I kind of go through
Mhm.
the process before doing a home visit of, can you send me some pictures? Can you
Mhm.
bring in a sample? If it's nothing, that we can easily tell that way, then I come out and do a home visit. And a lot of the things that I was just seeing were trees that have probably had some damage from like several years ago, right? From
Yeah.
like wind damage several years ago. And it's just been, they've slowly been declining, but you just don't see it until they
Yeah.
start to get stressed. And we've gotten suddenly, last year, we had a really bad drought at the end of the summer,
Mhm.
and it's getting really dry again here again. And so those trees are really starting to show those signs. So a lot of see them unfortunately telling people that like there's not much you can do for a giant tree that is declining,
Yeah.
that's not, has some sort of disease or insect pest that we can control. Or gently, talking to people about like they've tried to fix it themselves with tactics that we don't necessarily recommend anymore, or things that they have just seen online that they
Mhm.
think is going to help their tree, and navigating those waters of like, you have,
Tree questions are tough. Yeah.
you're trying your best to help the tree, but let's try to take this route. So I've had a couple of those recently. Those are like gearing up, but that's like kind of normal for this time of year for to
Yeah.
see large
Yeah.
tree
I
decline.
like this time of year for diagnostic work, and it's a discussion I commonly have. When you have a period in Kentucky that typically gets a little bit more dry, the tree gets starts to experience, environmental stress, or sometimes it's natural, but a little bit of environmental stress in the form of a reduction in water. But it's a great diagnostic time, and it's a great time to have conversations with people. And I always ask, if it's uniform all over the entire tree, is it uniform over the entire tree? Well, if they answer yes, then we start to talk about that could be, lean us towards environmental stresses, because diseases are rarely uniform. And that's probably the most important concept for people to know about, like especially mature trees, is a disease or insect damage will show itself unevenly, because that's the way diseases and uh, certain types of damages work. Things like verticillium, it'll be just one side of the tree this time of year that'll be dropping leaves and the other side's fine. But I guess the point there being, environmental stresses show up as the entire tree behaves exactly the same.
Mhm.
Lack of water shows up the entire tree generally exactly the same. If it's some sort of disease at work or some sort of insect damage, that is typically uneven. But that's the most important concept. If I could get that concept, across to people, look for that first. And we see that this time of year. So it's a good time of year to have that conversation with people about trees, larger trees.
Yeah, like with like fire blight, for instance, you'll see one or two branches that are just look like they were literally blighted by fire.
Yeah.
But then other leaves that are okay, and maybe it may spread, but it's not like all the leaves all at once turn brown. In the way that it would if that tree was really, really drought stressed or there was some other environmental factor involved. Well, oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, continue on with our trees, like large trees, it's hard to diagnose what might be going on with them. But kind of just to share like a story of a home visit I had once with a newer planted tree, that newer as in it had been in the ground for 2, maybe 3 years, and it started to decline, right? And the owner was just like, I've watered, I've mulched, I cannot figure out what's going on. And, we talked through it. And I finally went out there and we looked and it just kept declining. And eventually, it didn't look good. Like, there's no chance this tree is going to come out of this. So, with smaller trees, you do have the opportunity sometimes to actually figure out why this tree just suddenly died, right? Because, like, the location, because this homeowner was just like, yeah, let's pop it out of the ground. I mean, it's dead anyways. Let's take it out. And he had some landscape company come in and plant these trees. And so I remember going out there and he wasn't home. And he had kind of like halfway popped the tree out for me. And so I got down there and I was like actually digging around in the soil and ended up finding that the tree had girdled itself because they hadn't taken off the wire basket and there was burlap in there when they planted it. Right. So it's one of those things. It was like exciting because I was like, we know what killed your tree, but it's also like, oh, I'm sorry. This is what killed your tree, But with, smaller trees or smaller plants, we sometimes have the opportunity when it's those more cultural, environmental things to actually figure it out versus it's frustrating and it's hard for people to understand. Like you have had this tree for like 30 plus years and now it's just suddenly, declining.
And that's one of those that'll show up at the least amount of water stress. That if it's got a girdling root, and girdling roots are just shockingly common, especially for certain tree species, or maybe it's just because there are a lot of maples planted in Bourbon County, but it's goes back to how the hole was prepped and dug. And, a lot of commercial settings, you'll find that an auger was used to dig a hole. So it's very prevalent. Girdling roots, which is just simply a root that goes around, makes a lasso around the tree or a portion of the tree, and just tightens around as the tree grows and puts on diameter. But it's extremely common. I see that all the time. And so I end up digging around the base. One of the first things I do for young trees is I'll dig around the base 3 to 4 inches down with the homeowner, and we'll look for those roots, but incredibly common. Girdling roots. And now your situation was a little different where you had the cage and rope and you lots going on there. Lots going on.
Yeah. Well, in the world of trees, but also not trees, it was a difficult year for our fruit growers in multiple different ways. I know, Ray, you've got several orchards that you work with.
Yeah. In fact, our local orchard that we have had put out, public service announcements giving an update. And I love when they do this. They do a good job with social media, but they're trying to temper people's expectations. Yes, they will have fruit, but they gave an update on the fruit crop this year. Everything from blackberries and raspberries to peaches that, have a lot of winter injury. And we had cold snaps that just really reduced the production way, way, way down on fruit in Kentucky this year. And that goes for, things like blackberries and raspberries, strawberries, even apples that are typically more hardy. There are some, yes, but greatly reduced. It has been a very tough year, and our local orchard does a great job there in Bourbon County and of educating people on that. I think they do a good job, but they just really just wanted to let people know several weeks ago that, hey, it's an incredibly tough year. Here's what's going on with orchards generally in Kentucky this year. It's just been an extremely challenging year. And that started all the way back in the wintertime with really cold snaps, as I said, that destroyed a lot of fruit buds on things like peaches. And then we just had lots of overcast days. We had lots of moisture. It was just an odd year that translated to problems across the board in orchards. It's been really, really tough.
Yeah, I saw that post, and I actually saw one of the comments below, and I think it's that good kind of customer education and engagement, someone asked, because some people don't know, they don't have really a sense
Right.
of how a peach grows or an apple grows. That the question was, does this did the tree die, or was it just the fruit crop that's lost? And they said we actually did lose some trees because we had
They did.
brutal cold,
young
and
trees.
relatively early, and it was like December. It got really, really cold, and it was warm for a prolonged period in the fall, and then got really, really cold really
The
fast. So
fluctuations is what's so tough. I mean, if it's consistently cold, as long as it's not incredibly cold, consistency is more important. But the fluctuations, I think, really we're even learning things now on new
yeah.
trellising systems, age of certain varieties. A lot was learned. I mean, unfortunately, learned the hard way
But
with
in
issues.
general, what ends up happening is that those trees form flower. It depends on the type of tree, but they form flowers somewhere in that March, April, May window, and then they form buds first, and then the flower those buds then are at different stages of opening. And the more open it is, just like us emotionally, the more open it is, the more it's open to damage. Um, And so if you have the later into the year that a frost happens, the more damaging it can be to those. And there's all kinds of interesting things about the temperature that it takes to damage a bud at a certain, stage. But so anyway, just for those who are not familiar with that, what ends up happening is the cold comes and it damages or completely kills and knocks off these flower buds, which are the things that will eventually get, if pollinated, become apples or peaches or whatever in the spring. And so they did lose some trees to cold, but also it's just next year, as you're enjoying and looking forward to spring and looking at your seed catalogs and everything else in March, April, and May, keep an eye on, do we have a really cold snap, and think of our fruit producers. But
they'll have fruit this year, but now they work together. Farms across the state work together. I mean, they'll have great fall activities. They'll have some availability. So definitely go out and visit those places, but just kind of keep in mind, it's been a really tough year for those, but they always make it work with their activities and availability, one way or another. They'll, talk to other orchards in the state or make some kind of arrangements to have, something there on the farm for you to come and, take part in. So, yeah.
We saw it with tomatoes, except for in the vegetable direction, with these high temps that we had, right? With the heat advisories and all of that. Like, a lot of people were saying, like, I have all these tomatoes and they're just sitting there. They're not
Yeah,
turning
prolonged
colors.
green, yeah.
Or like the gaps you see. And it kind of like always explain to people, it's like, how hot it is outside and you don't want to be outside. Like, not that the plants don't want to be outside, but they're just kind of like, it's too hot. I'm done,
Yeah, high tunnels, it's even magnified even more. My
Right.
goodness, in high
Right.
tunnels, it's even worse. Yeah. But
So,
tomatoes are a great one, Jessica. We got lots of calls on those, and we just, in general, we lump a lot of different things together, environmental and physiological, like leaf rolls and
mhm.
white flecking, like the tissues of tomatoes. Like, a lot goes on. If you've never grown tomatoes in a home garden or a commercial setting, there's a lot more culls when the weather fluctuates a lot, and a lot of it's hard to predict because varieties are different, and heirloom's way different than a modern cultivar. But in every tomato, I mean, there's just so much difference between cultivars of tomatoes and varieties. Um, uh, just the issues that they have with the flesh of a tomato or setting fruit on tomato, or if it does set fruit, it stays green for a long period of time. It's almost like a tomato is a benchmarking kind of crop, in that there's it's a very durable crop and it's a consistent crop, but the environmental issues show up in tomatoes as much as
Right.
they do any crop. Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Well, some of those things, abnormally cold winter, abnormally wet spring, those are kind of they are variations on the norm. But there was with our strawberries, we had this new disease issue, this neopest issue.
Yeah.
Did you all come across that? I was curious if
I think all
folks.
commercial strawberry producers are dealing with that, or if they didn't
Yeah.
personally deal with it, they're dealing with the supply chain of where the plants come from.
Right. So my husband grows strawberries, and that was an issue. We, at the last second, canceled our order last fall because we could not get plants that were guaranteed clean.
Yeah.
And the worry is, with that disease, it gets in your soil and it remains, right? Um, so and we looking back on it, we think we might have already had it. It's one of those things that there's probably way more people out there who already who had it, and didn't know they had it. But I can say from farmers market experiences, personal experiences with other growers that we work with, who did go ahead and get plants and planted, their production was greatly reduced of what they were bringing to the market because the berry quality was just not there this spring. So I know that's a big thing that people are really hoping that they come out with resistant varieties, or there's some resources for those growers, because that you're right, Brett, that was a big thing that was impacted this spring at farmers markets that I know I'm involved with and around, that people who normally had tons of strawberries, it was a much shorter window
Yeah.
for strawberries this
They
year.
did not produce as long. Yep.
Yeah, well, it's this odd. So we recently did a recorded webinar thing, just an update on price report, on information from our price reports, and we covered a couple crops, and one of them was strawberries. And it's an odd quirk of farmers markets, I should say, that even in those situations, the prices don't necessarily change much. It's just the supply that's there. It's a odd quirk of that. So, but that was a question that we had, was this was a crazy year for strawberries. How is it that, the prices kind of were similar? Prices from 2025 were similar to 23, 24, and they weren't the highest of any of those years. And so there's not a real good reason for that, other than
I wondered that, Brett. I was thinking about that because you'd think that supply and demand, but I think by the time you realize there's a scarcity, the window's gone. So it's like this lag. By the time you realize that there's a scarcity, supply and demand would have normally kicked in with prices, it's the situation. I mean, you're already past it. So I wonder, do you think there might have been some of that or something else? Do you have any insight into that at all?
I would welcome Jessica's perspective on that.
Yeah.
Because I have my own thoughts too that I can share, but I'm curious what you think, Jessica.
I mean, I think it was just like, kind of just like as Ray said, it was such like a short window. I feel like this year of like people having it, that there wasn't any time to like be like, oh, there's not going to be any, there's not going to be any
Yeah.
left. I can raise the prices really high, right? Because I think a lot of them who I know who went into it, the few vendors who did have strawberries, they were hoping that they would have good ones and they would have them last a lot longer. But it was just significantly a shorter amount of time. And the same thing with blackberries a little bit this year. Like, going back to your other fruit stuff, like just being that winter injury, I noticed that as well. Even though those aren't as like, I mean, they sell fast. People want them, but it's not like a strawberry, right?
No, strawberries are different
Time of
animal.
year too, like the idea, like capturing that imagination of fresh product earlier in the year. People are ready for it. By the time July rolls around, people are like, I still like produce, but not like I did back in, in May and June.
Right. And I really think it just happened so fast. Like, then the people were like, oh, it's already
just
over?
didn't
Like, why
expect.
can't I get any more?
Normally the windows are pretty extended, but not this year. Yeah.
I think there's just this weird dynamic with farmers markets where you're setting your prices in a way that you aren't getting as much feedback through like a supply chain, for instance, as you would be in other cases where it's like somebody's paying more or somebody's buying, selling for less or selling for more this time of year. So that way then the price gets translated. Whereas it's more, I'm growing it, I'm putting it in this container, and then I'm selling it to my customer. And so there's just less opportunity for reflection on the costs and the going price and all that kind of stuff. But there's also, like, I don't know, there's just this general tendency within farmers markets, for instance, like tomato prices throughout the course of the season stay more or less flat the whole year. And so like if somebody has a high tunnel and they're able to produce a tomato in June or maybe even crazy late May, often they're not charging a significant premium compared to the price that they're charging in the middle of July, the middle of August. which is very bizarre. I mean, you do see
It's
some of it tapering
interesting,
off,
yeah.
but if you
Bec
compare that
yeah.
from farmers markets, if you compare that data with produce auction data, the produce auction prices look very much like what you expect any market to look like. It's a big U shape.
Mm.
Prices are high in the beginning,
Mhm.
high in the
Yeah.
end, and they're low in the beginning, and then the supply, or sorry, they're low in the middle, and that's where the supply is the highest. And so it's just this. There is this. I'm starting to call it the irrationality of farmers market pricing, or maybe it is rational, and it's just something I don't understand. And maybe it's worthwhile to people to, I'm going to sell you the straw, even though it was a harder year. I'm going to sell you these strawberries at the price that I want to sell them to you at. But please come back and buy tomatoes and sweet corn and other
Mhm.
stuff later.
Mhm.
That kind of relationship establishment. But that's just an interesting aspect of this year in particular, that kind of jumped out from some of the interactions I've had.
That is extremely interesting between farmers markets and, other forms of marketing, that it's not reflected because,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about, well, to price something properly or establish a baseline, you have to know, like, your input cost. Well, if you have a high tunnel, you have all of these additional input costs that are spread
Mm-hmm.
out
Right.
over, I mean, really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's more risk, like if you put
Yes.
out your tomato plants on April 15th and a frost comes on April 19th, versus
Sometimes
waiting a little bit.
that's
And
supplemental heat. That's more management when you have to manage the venting. If it's
yeah.
manual venting, it's just everything, all the inputs and risk. I mean, you have to be paid for risk too. That goes back to the strawberries, where
Yeah.
Mhm.
like, why would you raise your prices? I was talking to a couple of producers. I'm like, well, I mean, with Neopest, these new diseases, it's harder to get those guaranteed disease-free transplants in. So, and there's more risk. I mean, there's just more risk in the system.
Well, and
But
you're
yeah,
you're
Mhm.
paying the same amount to put out the 1,000 plants or
Oh, yeah.
200 plants or whatever, and then you're getting a small fraction of the yield that you're then able to sell. I mean, that's the economic basics of the decision making.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, it's just an interesting one, and it's one of those quirky aspects of these direct markets and small markets, and
Hmm.
um, yeah. Well, what else? I mean, we've kind of covered some of the spring stuff, and here we are transitioning into late
Yeah,
summer, almost
summer,
into
late
early
summer.
fall.
I
What do you
Ye
expect to be coming, or what is coming in now?
I've recently had a bunch of, like, lawn
was gonna
care
say
stuff, and
lawn
'cause
this year.
I
Yeah.
asked Ray for some help the other day, with one that I had, but again, Ray, as he messaged me back, he's like, "Oh, I've seen a lot of brown patch, right, in our
Yeah.
area, but it's really dry here," right? So, not so much of a
Yeah.
fungal, like, kinda
It's a
fueled
different.
stuff, right?
It's amazing. I did not realize there was such a difference. Jessica, how would you're would more South Central Kentucky. I'm definitely like
Mhm.
Central, North Central Kentucky. There's a huge difference in the mid growing point of the season till now. You guys are much drier, and we remained, you know, we had much more rain than you guys did. So we're dealing with like brown patch, which we don't really concern ourselves a lot with in lawns, but homeowners that have a higher level of management, we've been getting a lot of that. Where you guys, it dawned on me, I was like, wow, you guys are much drier. What you're seeing in lawns is just hot spots or dry areas of soil or different varieties of grasses that don't deal with the heat as much.
Right, yep.
Your problems are completely different, but I don't get a lot of phone calls on as far as lawn diseases go, but I've gotten more this year because you already mentioned it, brown patch. But what are you seeing? You're not seeing that. You're seeing like hotspot type issues, aren't you?
Yeah, just and like you said, I think, like, variety of grass that's already starting to,
Yeah.
like, not take the heat as well, or maybe,
Yeah.
like, go, like, kind of dormant with it. That and then as you mentioned crabgrass earlier, I've had several, like, crabgrass samples come in,
Yeah.
people wanting to kill it, and it's already, like, giant, right? And so they're,
Yeah.
like, trying to put crabgrass killer on it now, and it's like, "Oh, that's just a waste of, like, time, money, and chemicals," because that's not gonna touch a mature plant
Yeah.
that's going to seed, right? So I've had several of those come in, several of those, and it's interesting, right? You might come across this as well. That are people bringing it in that like these not landscaping, but lawn care companies have told them it's one thing, and they keep wanting to treat their yard, and so then they eventually are bringing it up here, to find out what it is or what we can do and help them and educate them about it and give them, provide those extension pubs that are like, hey, actually, this is the best time of year to treat for crabgrass. Don't let them keep charging you more money to treat your yard and put unnecessary chemicals out there and all of that stuff. So I've had quite a few of those come in, and I'm just wondering if it also correlates with the current weather conditions because people are like, I want my yard to be nice and green.
For you, definitely, because the only thing that's green out there is probably some clover and weeds. Like especially crabgrass, which loves hot, it doesn't mind hot, dry with the root systems and it being the type of weed species, what we consider a weed species. And I know there's nothing more frustrating to our homeowners seeing if they have a predominantly, cool season grass lawn, fescue, that stuff will still be green, but not as green as like that crabgrass is growing. And what I encourage homeowners, it's very happy, is just simply make sure you may not need to mow your entire lawn, but just do not let that crabgrass go to seed. That'll add to the problem. It's sort of a cyclical problem where, it increases the weed seed bed in your lawn, and then next spring you're going to have more germinate. So then you have to, if you're a homeowner that's concerned with issues like that, you're going to have to do a pre-application of product and then a post-application for what you miss with the pre-application for crab. It's this whole cycle. So the one thing you do is keep mowing, even though your lawn may not need to be mowed overall. Mow those weed species to try to keep those from going to seed. And Jessica already mentioned it. If it's hot and dry, which it sounds like where you are, Jessica, the chemical products add stress to your lawn at best, and at worst, they don't get translocated because of the nature of those chemicals. They don't get pulled into the plant because the plant's going semi-dormant. That includes some weed species. So the product doesn't work well. And weeds at this point in the season, they may have already produced seeds, so there's no need to spray them. There's a lot of issues we could talk about there, but your issues, Jessica, are different than my issues.
Yeah.
This year, people were shocked, myself included. My back lawn is hot and dry, shallow soils, and I can normally get by in the summer mowing every 14 days. It's been amazing this year. I've had to mow every 5 days the entire year. It's absolutely blowing my mind. I can never remember while I've lived in this location having to mow my lawn in the back every 5 days rather than every 14 days. It's just one of those years where I'm located at in the state of Kentucky. So.
And isn't that amazing to be like, we're both in Kentucky. We're really not that far
apart.
An hour
and a half apart, hour and a half.
And just how different, our homeowners and our farmers and the growing seasons are going.
Yeah.
So, and then that also makes it unique for those markets to tie that in because a lot of these vendors are coming from multiple different counties, right? Mm. And what products they can offer versus, maybe you always had a guy that you got cantaloupes from and then he doesn't have them this year, but so, the one next to him does, he normally don't. And it's just because of their growing conditions or whatever that they have.
Yeah, lots of disease pressures we've had. Of course, commercial producers are accustomed to dealing with that. But
it speaks to me to the extension, our extension system, and the idea of like an office in every county, especially with things like climates and in not even these are bigger than microclimates, but county level climates or little regional level climates. That's really interesting, and it also is a testament, I think, or it speaks to the value of just this type of information being available at that local level, because you're both saying people are coming to me and because their grass is brown, their plants are brown, and it's two very, very different reasons it requires this analytical and analytical lens and the familiarity with the situation, because it's something that people don't necessarily understand is sometimes that too much water and too little water look like the same. They look kind of similar. There's differences, but they look kind of similar. But plants
you can
not
love
happy.
A plant too much.
Yeah, exactly.
I've had to tell several people that I'm like, you loved that house plant a little too much. It was wilting because it was drowning, not because it was
drowning.
It's
drowning in your love. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and if you're interested in lawn care stuff, go back and listen to our episode we did with Jason Vaughn a couple episodes ago, We talked about his experiences with managing some very, very impressive turf at some cool big name golf courses, but then also talked about how he manages his own lawn with kind of a low input approach and pretty reasonable, and it looks pretty good. So I would go and check that out. Well, any other kind of things is so this I think we'll be talking to folks in kind of early September. At this point, I would just say I would echo what Ray said earlier. Just because people maybe struggled with fruit or struggle with some other stuff, this agritourism season that's coming up is so absolutely critical to a lot of our small farms. And so if you haven't made plans to, and you think, oh, we'll make plans, I can tell you if the time between May and August went quick, the time between September and Christmas is
a few critical weekends.
Yeah,
my goodness.
So I would just encourage you or challenge you, whatever that might be. Make a plan to go out there and visit. Maybe it's after work. Maybe it's on a weekend. Go out and check out one of these agritourism operations if you haven't, or even if you have, and invite a friend along, because it's a fun way of spending some time outside. A lot of these folks have put a lot of time and energy and money into making these cool spaces for kids, with slides and with hay bales and rides and all kinds of things like that.
I love it all.
To picking some
apples
or
and
eating some cider donuts.
You won't regret those cider donuts. Yeah.
I'm glad you brought
to make a plan to get them for myself, because apparently the support within my household has dwindled.
Look for a podcast on site at a local orchard while we
get
cider
you
donuts.
some cider donuts and a cold glass of apple cider, or hot. I don't know what your preference is. I like cold, but
one of my earliest horticultural memories is growing up in Louisville. We would travel across the river to Huber's Orchard and Winery, and we would get cut a Christmas tree, and we would then retreat back to their you'd get thoroughly cold cutting the Christmas tree, and then you'd go retreat back to their store area where if you cut a Christmas tree, you got free hot apple cider. And
nice.
I'm sure it was delicious, but at that time it was like the most delicious thing that I've ever had. And so, I think just we're almost there to the cooler time of year. And so just think about our producers and think about making that a priority. So, well, I think I'm going to wrap us up here and just say a reminder, if you can follow us on Instagram at Horticulture Podcast. You can also email us at horticulturepodcast@gmail.com if you have ideas for episodes, or you just like something we said, or you just want to say hello to one of us or all of us. You can do that there. If you have a chance to leave us a quick review and rating, we appreciate that. It helps us out a lot, helps us be seen by more people. But with that, I say, as we grow this podcast, we really hope that you'll grow with us, and we'll talk to you next time.